Switch on. Yes, we're recording. I'm sorry, I'm going to move about. I know this is in your way and it's a bit of a pest. However, there are millions of people all over the world just desperate to join in this Near Avram Women's Shiur. So this will be posted on, well, I will give it to our hostess, Ms. Bernstein, who will send it to you if you want it. You'll also find it in my YouTube channel, and you'll find it in Torah anytime. And it's those who insist that the camera angle just has to be right, which means I can't really see you. But I'll jump about, because I tend to jump about. Okay, so next week's Shiur, we're having an Aliyah, opening upstairs. Right, okay. And the Shiur is dedicated to your father, who is David ben Yeshua Halevi. His neshama should have an Aliyah and nachas from all of his family. Okay, so this, as we just heard, the title for our first Shiur in the Elul series, When You Forgive Them, He Forgives You. And I've got an alternative title for you, which is part of the same Shiur. Is it possible that HaShem actually gets things right? Now, that sounds a little bit ridiculous. Is it possible that God actually gets it right? And when I say that, I'm talking about in our lives. Because so often we want that He doesn't do, or He hasn't done to us what He's done to us. Do you remember last time we spoke? Well, first of all, just to remind you, we have touched on this subject from a different angle that I'm coming at it today, and that's a Shiur called Forgiving the Unforgivable. Now, we had that last session. I think I sent you the tapes. That's very worthwhile looking at during Elul, because as we all know, the hardest thing to deal with as a Jew is other people. And that helps you when other people have really hurt you very, very badly. So you can look at that. But I've got a different aspect of the Shiur I'd like to, or this concept I'd like to go into today. Okay, so I'll start with a true story, because everybody likes a story, and it happened many years ago. It must have been 8 years ago, which is not really so many years ago. 8 years ago, I got a phone call from a rabbi in London. I didn't know the rabbi, except by reputation. Very nice fellow, and it was a video call, and so he said, Rabbi, in a London accent, Rabbi, we've got a brilliant idea here, and we want you to be part of this thing that we're doing. And I said, oh yes, good, very busy. What was the brilliant idea? He said, we're going to go and speak to many rabbis and ask them how they would answer this question. Now, what was the question that we had to answer? So it was a very, very famous story. And the story, I don't know if you've heard this story. If you're from England, you would probably heard this story. Probably. Never mind. Anyway, so basically, it's a true story of a young yeshiva bocher who was learning and giving shiurim along with another bunch of yeshiva bocherim in a shul in London, near Hyde Park. I'm not sure which of it was, St. Peter's Place or whichever they were, Marble Arch, one of them. And he went out and he's walking near the park, and sitting on a bench was this old fellow who obviously clearly looked Jewish. So he sat down beside him, being a gregarious young man, and started to engage the fellow in conversation. The fellow was an old fellow, and was tolerant of this young man and sympathetic to his enthusiasm. And so he said, in a few days' time it's Rosh Hashanah. And so the old fellow says, where are you going to be davening? Said this young frum fellow in his naivety, because all young frum fellows assume that everybody is frum. So, where are you going to be for Rosh Hashanah? He said, nowhere. So he said, you're not going to shul? He said, I was in a shul. It was called Auschwitz. And I'm not going near any shuls anymore. And he rolled up his sleeve, and there was the number in his arm. Okay, so the young fellow, obviously way out of his depth, struggling badly, he just made nice, and off he went. That's the story. Rosh Hashanah came and went. He was davening, I think, in that shul, and then a couple of days later, he walked into the park again, and there was the old fellow. So they smiled. He kept off the subject this time. But when it came to Yom Kippur and he was in the shul, again there was a break in the davening, and he walked into the park, and there once again was the old fellow. So it was Yom Kippur, so he just felt that he couldn't possibly not try and reach him and persuade him to come into shul. So he said, I hope this is not inappropriate, but would you not consider it's Yom Kippur? It was in the afternoon. Would you not maybe consider us coming into the shul maybe just for a few minutes in Yom Kippur? So he said, absolutely not. Young man, if you knew what I'd been through, and gave him a Musar drasha. Or was it an anti-Musar drasha? I'm not sure. Anyway, so basically, the young fellow had an idea. He said, we have, this shul here has specially brought in for Yom Kippur the most fantastic chazan you've ever heard in your life. Because the fellow had mentioned he likes music. He liked opera. So he said, you can assume therefore he likes chazanim. So you must come in here. Just come and hear him for 5 minutes. Just music. Just come and you'll enjoy it. And so, okay. So he comes in with the young fellow. They're starting to daven mincha, and it's going to read from the Sefer Torah. And the old fellow is sitting beside this young man at the back. And then the chazan starts to sing. And when the chazan starts to sing, the old fellow gets up. And he walks to the front to look at the chazan, and he looks up at the chazan. And the chazan stops and looks down at the old fellow. See, when he first met him, he told him absolutely not. He wasn't coming near a shul because he'd been in a shul called Auschwitz. He also explained to him that his only son had been killed in Auschwitz. But there was his only son. He was the chazan. Tears, reunion, unbelievable story, beautiful story. The point was, this fellow said, the story, I knew the story anyway, but he went over to me. We're going to ask a bunch of rabbis what they would have said to try and get this fellow to go into shul. Now his thing was, it was obviously the whole thing was directed by HaShem, but you still got to do your shtadlus. So he said, what would you say to get the fellow to come in? Right, you're the young fellow, or you're the rabbi, and you sit down to this fellow, and he's been in Auschwitz, etc., and he's not going near a shul. What would you, Rubenstein, and all the other rabbis, I can't remember all the other rabbis they spoke to, what would you say to get this fellow to go into shul? So I'll tell you what I said in a second, but I thought it might be interesting for you to have a think about that yourself. Incidentally, the answer, if your answer is, I have not the faintest idea, that's perfectly okay, right? Although for some reason, what I answered popped straight into my head. I had no hesitation, and again, it was when it's very spontaneous. You can think it comes from way in there, as opposed to sort of like having to calculate up here. Anybody want to give that a thought? What would you have said to that old fellow that got him into shul, where he would discover nice happy ending? And incidentally, if you're thinking at the back of your mind, there's not too many stories of Auschwitz like that with happy endings. Yes, I know that. Afal PK, what would you have said to get this fellow to go into shul, that as it were, see his son, and there's a happy ending? Any ideas? Anybody want to come up with a touch of genius? I didn't actually, yes.
My first thought is, not every shul is the same. Like, there's a lot of different kinds of shuls.
Oh, of course. This was this is what's called the United Synagogue, which is the traditional, the Jonathan Sacks. Lord Jonathan Sacks was the chief rabbi of what's called the United Synagogue in the UK, not like in America. Are you an American? Yeah. Okay, so the United Synagogue in America is conservative, but in England it's orthodox by, affiliation to the halacha, etc. Not necessarily more traditional Jews. Most United Synagogue Jews aren't Shomer Shabbat, but they are traditional Jews. They recognise that maybe they should be. Well, that's a head start. So it's that sort of synagogue. Any ideas? Don't worry, I don't. And I didn't see this video, which just in case he's watching this somewhere, I'd like a copy of the video. But it would be nice to see what the other rabbis said. I said the following thing: why don't you come into synagogue on Yom Kippur just to see if you can forgive God? Mm-hmm. Just to see if you can bring yourself to forgive God. Now, if that sounds heretical and apicorsish to you, I don't blame you. It sounds like a big message to me. It's just that I have sources for this. There was a rabbi called Rabbi Wachtvogel, and he was the mashgiach of Lakewood yeshiva, of course, in Lakewood, which is pretty orthodox. And Rabbi Wachtvogel, in this little book here, says an astonishing thing. I've got to read this to you. I'll read this to you. It's only 4 lines, so I'll even take some time to read it in Hebrew and show off my Hebraic skills, even though I can't give Shiurim in Hebrew. I say to people, my read is hopeless. I speak, however, fluent Chumash. Anyway, a mashgiach hevi pesikta derav kahana. So basically, the mashgiach, that's Rabbi Wachtvogel, quoted a medrash. And the medrash says, Omer Kodesh Baruch Hu Yisrael. And this is at this time of year. Hashem says to the Jewish people, Atem mizbaishem la'asas tshuva. Are you, or do you ever feel embarrassed to do teshuvah? I mean, you're going to stand in front of, this is the Yom Hadin, and you're going to be standing there in front of Hashem on the Yom Hadin to say sorry. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I have the custom, and many people have a similar custom, to make a list of things that they really want to say sorry for, and they really want to work on for the coming year, and put it inside their machzor. And I do this frequently. I've got one inside my Seder as well. I try to make a daily routine, just to remind myself what a complete failure I am on a daily basis. Anyway, so basically, I put this inside my machzor, and as I opened it, another list from a previous year fell out. So I picked up the 2 lists, and I looked like Can you finish this story for me? Identical. Totally identical. And at that point, you immediately turn around and say, Rubenstein, you hypocrite, you joke. Are you really going to stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu again and apologize for the same things again, knowing that you're going to do the exact same things again? However, the obvious point is that you have to realize that getting it right might take an entire lifetime. To change that might take an entire lifetime. Okay? But sometimes we feel so convinced that we'll never change this, we'll never change that list, that we give up. And almost like that fellow sitting on the bench, you just don't want to go to shul. The whole thing is a joke. I remember a lady, I think I once told you in Manchester, who tells me that, she told me once, when she comes to this time of the year, she just wants to hide underneath the sheets and wait for it all to be over because she just can't. She's scared. She's scared of the hypocrisy. Because we do feel, do we not, that we're going to make the same mistakes again and again and again. So this is what the Medrash says. Amar Kodesh Baruch Yisrael. Hashem says to the Jewish people, Atem mizbaishem la'asas tshuva. You're embarrassed to do tshuva? Embarrassed. In other words, stand in front of God and say, I did this, I did that, I did the other thing. And I did point out to you once, there is nothing that you could have done wrong that God cannot forgive. Even adultery, even murder. This is pretty serious, no? If you commit adultery, you've brought in all probability or possibility a life into the world that doesn't belong here. If you committed murder, you've taken a life from the world that should be here. How does your regret change anything? It does. Hashem considers your sincere regret, and here's the wonderful words from the Mesilas Yesharim, Akiras harotzon ka'akiras hamaisa. The desire to get rid of that passion for bad things, God considers it as though the bad thing that you did never existed. Oh, the person who did it, look, here's a video. He looks just like you. Yeah, he looks just like me, but that's not me anymore. I've changed inside. And the Rambam famously explains that you can tell if you're a Baal or a Baal's tshuva, if you're in the exact same circumstances when you murdered or committed adultery, with the same passion, the same desires, but this time you didn't. So what changed? You changed. And you changed. But sometimes you're just so embarrassed to stand in front of Hashem and you know what you've done wrong and your failures, and maybe you're addicted to this, and maybe you're addicted to that, or maybe you just can't control your behavior. Omar Kodesh Baruch Yisrael Atem B'Baishal Asas Tshuva Hareini Shov Rishon. I'll do tshuva first. Hareini Shov, or I'll come close to you first. You're embarrassed to come close to me. embarrassed to come to your father and say all the things you've done wrong, then I'll come close to you. Isn't this bizarre? What does that mean? Because it's a posuk. If you're interested, it's Yirmiyahu and it's Lamed Yudches. Shenemar Koy Amar Hashem Henini Shov. Hashem says, I will come to you. I'll seek you out. And then, just in case you're confused about this, Rabbi Bachtvog will make it clear. What does it mean that Hashem will do teshuvah? Hashem doesn't never do anything wrong. You remember from those who've been here from the beginning of these Shiurim, what's the one word that doesn't occur in the vocabulary of the Almighty? Good. Oops. Hashem never gets anything wrong. So maybe Hashem will do teshuvah. And the answer is, no, he doesn't do anything wrong, but we think he does. How could God, have you heard somebody say, how could God allow this to happen? How could God do this to me? So Hashem says, I know you feel that. And therefore, because I want us to get back together again, the word tshuva comes from the word shav, meaning to connect again. So I'll connect to you first. Maybe I'll find the yeshiva boker sitting outside, in the park, or coming to the park where you're sitting, who will manage to come up with a clever idea so that we'll get back together again. There's a million ways Hashem can reconnect with us. But Hashem can do tshuva as well. Because tshuva is a concept, a human concept, that we understand it. Okay, you understand that I've been unkind to you, like I will come and, as it were, make up with you, rather than you having to make up with me. I think that's a beautiful idea. I've always loved that idea. So that's why I said to this fellow, why don't you come in and see if you can forgive him? Hashem says, I want you to forgive me. Look, he knows everything he does is right, but we don't know that and we don't feel that. So it hurts me, Hashem is saying, that you're hurt by me, or you feel I've let you down. But does Hashem ever let us down? In Shara B'tochen, famous Chalvas Levavos, and here's my translation and commentary on the book. The big chapter, the critical chapter of this book is the third chapter, which deals with the question of tzaddik v'ra'aloi, why do bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. This troubles all of us. If you remember when we talked about this in the past, I told you an interesting fact. An interesting fact is that whenever I ask the question to a male audience or a female audience, they always come up with a very, very different response. What troubles you, I say, more? Tzaddik v'ra'aloi or Rosh v'toivloi? And there's a clear gender split. And I asked this in the Shiur last time we did this, and it worked out the exact same thing. Men are always upset by Rosh v'toivloi. It's unfair. And men, as my wife likes to point out, are fixers. Men wants to fix stuff. And this is an injustice, and I'm going to sort it all out. Women are more upset by tzaddik v'ra'aloi. Because women they roll with it better. They go with the flow better than Hashem's flow, better than men do. They've got less ego than men have, of course, apart from myself. At the beginning of the third perek of Refuas Alev, in my translation, Shara B'tochen, I'll just read to you I won't bother reading the Hebrew and translating it because I've already done that in the book. There are 5 essential principles that a person has to understand, believe in, and make part of his or her very being, in order for his betachon and Hashem to be complete. So there's 4. I'm going to jump straight to number 5. Number 5 says the following thing. The 5th is knowing there is no individual who has the power to harm you or himself unless Hashem facilitates it. So there you are. Anything that happened to you that hurt, Hashem allowed it to happen. It's in black and white. So can't you now see and feel sympathy from the fellow who thought he'd lost his son in Auschwitz? Don't you know people have gone through terrible things and really can't forgive God? Because it says it in black and white. If terrible things happen to you, Hashem allowed it to happen. So you can understand people turning around and saying, well, that's it. If you could have done that, then I'm done with you. And sadly, some people do say that. Yeah. But we know what the Gemara says in this, and it's a famous piece of Gemara, it's in Brachos, it's in Daf Hey. And the Gemara Brachos says that if something goes wrong in your life, you fashvish myself. Analyze your life. See if you did anything wrong that could have justified this. Stage one. Stage two is if you've analysed, did you do anything wrong that could have justified this, and the answer is no, then you have to go on to the next stage. And the next stage is maybe there's something positive you should have done that you failed to do. Maybe that's why this thing has happened to you. And stage three, which is the one that's hardly high in the popular stakes, is that if you've never done anything wrong, you've never done anything, failed to do anything right, and you're still in suffering, it's because Hashem has given you Shiurim shel Ahava, ladies. Shiurim shel Ahava, He's making you suffer because He loves you so much. Thank you. People are not terribly keen on that one. I think we're more comfortable with, I don't mind it so much if I did something to deserve this. But, just, I've done nothing wrong and I'm suffering? That's a little bit hard. Now, this is, incidentally, I think we may refer to this as well. I'll use myself as an example. And incidentally, if you ever doubted that the rabbis have got a sense of humor, I think this is a very, very good example that they do. Okay? I'll make it me. Something goes wrong in the Rubenstein life. And I'm struggling with something, some issue. And so I say to myself, I don't understand. How could this possibly happen to me? Have I done anything wrong that could have justified this? No. It's good. So you start to laugh, right? So who is going to get past the first stage? Now don't be shy. The camera's pointing at me. Nobody will see you. But put up your hand if you've had a life in which you've done nothing wrong. Well, who gets past the first stage? But if you get far past the first stage, it's, maybe there's something good you should have done, Rubenstein, that you failed to do. No. Who's going to get to that stage? And then it's Yisurim Shal. But nobody's going to get to the stage of Yisurim Shal Ahava. This happened to you because God just happens to want to give you a challenge by which you will grow by rising to the challenge, which is what Yisurim Shal Ahava is. Who's going to get past the first stage? We've got to throw into this the famous idea, and we know this because David Melech writes it in Tehillim, the L'cho Hashem Chesed, to you Hashem is kindness, ki ata teshalem leish k'masehu, because you pay a person back for their deeds, mida keneged mida, measure for measure. Why is God paying us back for our deeds, chesed? Because very often we can do damage to other people. We can hurt other people by accident or by simply not being aware that this could be a hurtful thing. But if the same thing happens to you and now it hurts you, then that should stir you to be aware of, that rings a bell. I did that to her or him or whoever it was. And therefore it's a chesed because it's allowing you to realize that the pain that you're now feeling is the pain that you made somebody else feel. And therefore you can address that mistake within yourself and solve the problem. It's a chesed when you have pain if it leads you to understand you gave the same pain to somebody else. Mida keneged mida. So now it all makes perfect sense. When something happens, now I'm going to say, did I do anything to deserve this? It's anything like this. So somebody steals from me £60,000. Did I ever steal £60,000 or anything like that? No, the answer might be, and I hope in my case, no, I've never done that. Then move on. Now it makes sense. As long as you can attribute the suffering, you connect the suffering to something you've done, then it starts to be a little bit bearable. Yes?
What about the sins of your forefathers? Like you pay for a couple of generations for their sins?
No, you don't. Only if you walk in the same footsteps of your forefathers' sins. Only then. And then there are several generations that are required for that to be the practice of the family before God intervenes. That God never punishes you for the mistakes of your father. After all, it's your father's responsibility. Unless you want to get into Gilgulim and reincarnation and you were your father, or in your case your mother, or great-grandmother. but that's going to take far. I think we did reincarnation, didn't we? Yes, yes, I think we, yes, at least in another life. Okay, so anyway, so as long as we can make that connection, then it makes sense. So Hashem is allowing me to suffer, which, maybe there's a reason for that. And maybe it's a positive reason. And maybe it's to help me because I just didn't realize such things can happen. Now, when we talked about this last time, when I was in that Shiur called Forgiving the Unforgivable, I pointed out that if somebody does something really, really hurtful to you, and remember the title of the Shiur is, Will you forgive, when you forgive them, he forgives you. I'm not talking about forgiving somebody who hasn't asked for forgiveness. That's a different category. If somebody has intentionally done something appalling to you, and in all probability has done the same thing to other people, because people are very seldom selectively evil. They're generally evil to everybody they come into contact with. Then to forgive them without them wanting forgiveness, to forgive them without them showing any regret, is simply giving them a heter to turn around and do it to somebody else all over again. And you become complicit. We've got a couple of Olim Chadashim who've joined us today. Speaking as a mere 6-month-year-old, Oli, I know this. You'll come across yes, one Olim, and yes, true. So let me give you a warning. People will tell you all the time. It's also the Gemara Brachos right at the beginning. Eretz Yisrael is niknas b'Yisurim, right? Eretz Yisrael is you only get Eretz Yisrael through suffering and challenges. Be careful. Often the people are saying that are the people who failed to bring the food or your furniture that like they said they would, or the electrician who didn't turn up. Don't worry, Eretz Yisrael niknas b'Yisurim. Thank you. If it's used as a heter, then it's not. That's it. If you're trying to help somebody who's suffering, then you can use it, but not as. And that's why I crashed into your car. But don't worry. It's got to be that the person actually shows regret, right? Fine.
And if they don't realise what they did, should you
Oh,
tell
yes. Oh, now you're going into big stuff. Just trying to check timing here. Yeah, but I can say that just a few seconds on this. The philosophical Shiurim make it quite clear the ace of the prohibition against hating your fellow Jew in your heart is when you hate them in your heart. That means to say, hi, how are you? I'll see you later. I hate that person. Then if that is the case, you see, if I am upset with you, or you're upset with me, and you let me know, if you sort of like walk away from me or frown when you see me, I know that I have done something, or I'm perceived to have done something. I may have done something, or you think I've done something. So therefore, now that you've let me know, then I can do something about that. And you can sorry, I've upset you in some way. Is anything I've done? It's an opportunity to put it right. But if you hide the fact that the person has upset you, now how did they ever get the opportunity to put it right? Now, when we talked about this, again, I think we've talked about this in the past, it's critical when you go to the person to say, I've been upset, you've got to frame it in words that allow them to have an out and you to have an out as well. That is to say that if you say to them, I'm upset because you did. See, the problem, maybe they didn't. Right? We're very often upset because it seems to us that A, B, and C have happened. And very often, in our heart, we can see no alternative explanation, no alternative narrative except A, B, and C. Suppose it's X, Y, and Z, or Z, depending on which part of the country you come from. Suppose it's something totally different. The number of times, and this is the mitzvah of Don Lukaskus, a number of times I've been convinced that somebody has done something really nefarious and horrible to me, and then when you actually challenge them about it, then they say, well, that's not what happened. And they give you a totally different story, which you could never anticipated. As long as you haven't said, you did, what you have to say is, it seems to me. I was hurt because I think, or I understood. Then that saves them. It's not because if you challenge somebody and said, you did, then people's natural reaction is to push back. But if you said, it seems to me, which generally is the most you can ever say anyway, because how do you know what's going on in somebody else's life when they behave badly? I remember there's somebody actually here, not very far from here. I remember I was a young man and I moved, they lived in the opposite nearby street to me, called Cavendish Road when I lived in Manchester. And I went to see a certain person, and he wasn't there, and his wife opened the door. And I said, hello, I'm here to see, called him George. And she was very, very unfriendly. And so he wasn't available. When I see him, I don't know, well, that was the end of that. I thought, oh, she's very unfriendly. I didn't know that she was dying of cancer. I didn't know she was going to be dead 2 weeks later. She did. And I went away being a young man, of course, maybe not having come to the conclusion that I've come to a little bit more recently, that until you know exactly what's going on in somebody's life, you can't know what's going on. Sometimes people do behave badly, but sometimes it's not their fault. Another Manchester story was a lady from a very frum shul that I used to daven in called the Ohel Torah, and frum lady, and her son was one of my chavrusas, and suddenly her behaviour went very strange. I mean, she used to cover her hair, and she no longer was covering her hair, so that was a change. That's not the worst of it you can do, but sitting in a McDonald's eating treif, that was pretty bad. And everybody was shocked at her behaviour, and her dress became so inappropriate and unsneesty, and so on and so forth. And everybody was deeply shocked. And people spoke to her, and she was just extremely dismissive. And then I think it took a month for them to discover the brain tumour. So you can never really, you've got to be, if you go and say to the person, I'm hurt, I feel hurt, and I think you did, it appears to me, then the person can turn around and say, again, they can turn around and say, I did it, and I've been extremely embarrassed and ashamed of it. I've just not been able to bring it to you to apologise. And some people are too ashamed to apologise. That's what HaShem says. I know you're sometimes too ashamed to come to me. I'll come to you, which is what you've done. Now you've copied God. You've come to the person. But you've done it in a way that you've made sure it's not going to explode. You've worded it cleverly. And they might turn around and say that I didn't do it, and offer you a completely different narrative. And you go, oh, I'm glad you told me that. And I'm glad I didn't think irreversibly that you had done it. They might, however, turn around and say, yeah, I did it. I enjoyed doing it, and I can hardly wait to do it to you again. Now, in that case, you don't have to forgive them. They don't want forgiveness, right? If to forgive somebody who's likely to do it again, not such a good idea. So let me point out that when things happen to you, as the Sharbatochen says, it all is because Hashem has allowed them to happen to you. Then could you have tainas against God? A lot of people do. They're just generally very hurt. The problem with God is we're always putting him in trial, and he doesn't defend himself. How could God let this happen? Why did this happen? And people get outraged. Now, I suppose if we could put God in trial, and Jews have done that in the past, in Auschwitz, they made a basting and put God in trial. But what was happening in Auschwitz? Did the Jewish people deserve this? Came to the conclusion, no. And then went to Daven Mincha. In other words, from our point of view, we can't see it. But God's God. But that's the point. God's God. And do you have emunah in God? If you've got emunah and trust, then just like a child doesn't understand why the parent is taking them. I remember my mother took me to get my tonsils out and left me in this hospital with a nurse who was about 90 foot tall as far as I was concerned. I think I was 3. How could you do this? Because I needed my tonsils removed. Sometimes if you've got faith and trust, right, it must be for the best. It's my mum, or my mom, or it's my dad, and they wouldn't do anything that's not good for me. If that's our relationship with Hashem, then it all becomes a little bit easier. So that's why I said, when you forgive them, he forgives you. Is it possible that God got it right? Other title. See, when people do nasty things to you and God's let it happen, maybe, is it possible he got it right? Because possibly the outcome from what happened to you, if you say, did I do something to provoke this? Oh, I did that to somebody else, is a correction for a whole lot of stuff. And relationships are reestablished, and peace is reestablished in families, and money's returned, and all sorts of stuff happen and flow from that. I moved from Manchester in England, and we moved to America for a job, which was very, very promising. Working for a rabbi, working for an organization, and there was a nice salary, and they headhunted me and all that stuff. And I was really very pleased. So I ended my various jobs in England, which I could have stayed in quite happily, but I was going to the Golden Medina, and off I went, and the job, which was promised to last for 3 years, lasted 10 months. The rabbi was not a rabbi; he was completely phony. The organisation was hardly an organisation at all. And 10 months later, I now had a mortgage to pay for my house in Manchester. I was paying this huge amount for this crummy apartment in Flatbush, as so many crummy apartments in Flatbush are crummy. And now we had 3 months' money, and then we were really seriously in trouble. And so the situation was terrible, but what would really upset me was my reaction to the situation. Because I kind of believe myself to be a reasonably Orthodox Jew. And certainly, I think I would define myself as a ma'amin, somebody who believes in God. So I went to see Rav Matisyahu Solomon, the Chassadik Kodesh Lebrocha, who was the old Mashgiach in Gateshead before he wanted to become the Mashgiach in Lakewood. He spoke at my first wedding to my late wife, Aleh Shalom. So he was in my life for over 50 years. I told him the story, and I said, the problem is, Rebbe, I think I'm a Maimon. I think I believe in God. But if I'm a Maimon, why am I so worried? Right. 3 months of money left. Why am I said, I feel like a fraud. And Rav Matisyahu said, maybe you are a fraud. Maybe you are a fraud. And then, of course, he's a Yeki. He comes from a Yekish family. Yekis say it the way it is, which is what I like about Yekis, by the way. Yekis are straight. And a Litvisher Rosh Hashiva as well. In combination, don't go to ask one of those sort of people if you want flattery and deception. You won't find it. Anyway, so then he laughed a little bit, and he was very kind and helped me with the issues. But there was something I had to ask myself. Am I really a Maimon? How strong is my emunah? How easy is it to have emunah? I remember I was doing a Shabbaton in Rhode Island, a lovely little Jewish community, and it was Baruch Hashem, a very successful Shabbaton. And Sunday morning wasn't part of the event, but I was still there davening there. Oh, thank you so much. How did you know? Wow, we've got Ruach HaKodesh. Right? That's better. Anyway, so basically, there was a lady there. I think she was divorced. Maybe she lost her husband. Anyway, she was there, and it was a son's bar mitzvah, and the son was putting on tefillin for the first time. So her father, who was not frum, had come along, and he was trying to help the boy to put on tefillin for the first time. But as he had not a clue how to put on tefillin, because the last time he put on tefillin was his bar mitzvah, and that must have been something like 60 years before. You know, it doesn't look good when it's sort of around the ear and stuff. And so I was the guest rabbi, so I stepped up and said, as the guest rabbi, could I have the honor of putting the boys tefillin on? So he said, yeah. So I put the tefillin on, and of course everybody was relaxed because I made a joke out of it. Sense of humor can be a useful thing. And that was that. She wrote me a letter the next day. It was a very brilliantly written letter, and I was going to bring it and read it to you, but it would take me too long. Anyway, basically the letter said the following thing. She thanked me very much for stepping in at the right moment. And she explained about herself that she's a Balas Tshuva, she came from Long Island. And she ended up in Yerushalayim, she ended up at the Kotel, she ended up in the seminary, and now she's a frum lady, totally observant and all that sort of stuff. And she says, and sometimes you see that Hashem is clearly on your side. A moment of embarrassment in the synagogue, it just happens to be that Hashem just sends you along from England, it was actually New York, and you step in and help it. It was a very nice letter. But then she goes into a whole question about emunah. And how she's gone through all these tough times, either the loss of a husband, a divorce, single mother, trying to bring up the family herself, and sometimes she feels abandoned, and sometimes she feels that Hashem's not on her side at all. Beautiful letter. She said at the end of the long letter, and she's got I think she's got a PhD, she's a very, very bright lady. And she says, and Hashem HaShem. Sometimes the Torah in me speaks loudly and clearly, but then there's times of suffix and question and is. I remember this phrase. Is, says the Yitzhahara to me, is faith just ibuprofen to create, take away the pain from the terrible things we're going through? She said she took this question to Professor Twersky, the famous Professor Twersky, and she wrote to him, all the stuff, and he wrote back and said, they met us, right? Tell me, Mrs. Cohen, let's say, tell me, Mrs. Cohen, how many times a day do we say Shema? How many times a day do we say Shema? So she knew this was a trick question, right? So she said, 3 times a day, morning, evening, and before we go to sleep. Why do you think we have to say it so often? Do you believe in God? I think so. Okay. So I believe in God as well, but I have to say Shema 3 times a day, and you say Shema 3 times a day as well. So if we believe in God, why do we have to say it 3 times a day? So this brilliant woman said that her reply was and he said, the reason, Mrs. Cohen, that we have to say it 3 times a day is because we constantly have to remind ourselves that we believe in God, that we have emunah in God. It's not an easy mitzvah. It's a very difficult mitzvah because you're challenged in this by other people and by HaShem sometimes too, in order to, as it were, solidify that thought. But sometimes we fail. And sometimes we say, I can't see why Hashem is doing this to us. Sometimes we just don't have sufficient emunah. Sometimes there are Rubinstein who's a fraud. And so basically he said, calm yourself. Don't doubt yourself. And ladies, don't doubt yourself. That if sometimes you said, how could God do that to me? God knows that. That's why he says, you do tshuva. And if you can't do tshuva, I'll come to you. I'll do tshuva for you. Oh, don't worry about the fact it says in the Chovos Levovos in the 3rd parak that everything that happened to you is because I let it happen to you. Yes, I know that. And I know you might not get it. And I know it might have hurt like crazy. But guess what? Sometimes the medicine is really, really tough in order to affect the cure. And sometimes I have to do that. But I know you don't see that. And I know you think I've let you down. So I'll come to you. It's a beautiful idea. Emunah? We stood among... We came out from Egypt, right? That's the big emunah thing, right? And we saw 10 incredible miracles, Dam, Tzvardeag, and all that sort of stuff. And then we come to Kriyas Yamsuf, right? Well, the Egyptians, total morons, chase us into the sea. I mean, even if you hadn't read the book or seen the movie, I think you could have worked out what was coming next, right? Glug, 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 yiskadav, yiskadash, right? And they chase in after us. And then the Torah says, and the Jewish people believed in God and Moshe as his servant. Did we? No. Or not enough. We only believed in God when we stood at Mount Sinai. Because then it says, Moshe, you come up to the top of the mountain and they'll hear me speaking to you and they'll believe in you and me forever. If at Mount Sinai, if 7 weeks later standing on Mount Sinai, then we're going to believe in God forever. What was that stuff at the Yam Suf? Sometimes you get high and you think, oh yes, I believe in God, that's fine. But then along comes challenges and that it starts to waver. But when we stood there and God spoke to us directly, then we all believed that Mount Sinai was a once in Jewish history. When the Mashiach comes, that will be nothing compared to what comes. But normally, in the last 3,500 years or so, then there was the one biggie, and then after that, that's it. I've shown you what I can do right now. Just hold on to that image. Keep that picture in your mind. But that's a hard thing to do. So hard, as Rabbi Twersky brilliantly observed, say Shema 3 times a day, just to remind yourself who and what you are. How are we doing for time? Oh, good. I've got enough to tell. Good. This is so good. You're going to love this. Because this says nasty things about husbands. And I'm sure you'll enjoy this. It's not really, I'm lying. Here, page, I marked this before. Don't you fall out on me. Chapter 10. Oh, there it is. Good. See, it did fall out on me. The Chovos Chaim is very, one of the most difficult things, as we're talking about people, is Lashon Hora, as we know. Most people find that very, very difficult. The Gemara says everybody fails ultimately when it comes to gossiping or listening to gossip. What, however, if the Lashon Hara is, as it were, essential that you do share something nasty? Remember, Lashon Hara is speaking something true about somebody else. If it's something false, it's called Motzi Shemra, and that's even worse. But suppose you turn around and say something which is true about somebody in order to save somebody else from being trapped. You were in business with this guy and he stole a lot of money. Surely it's lo to'eles, it's for a positive purpose if I share that with you because you're thinking of going into partnership with this fellow. Right? Or the fellow's been suspected or charged 10 years ago with molestation. You want to know that. You want to keep your daughters away from this guy. And so on and so forth. Is it mutter to speak Lashon Hara? So the Chofetz Chaim says maybe. But there is a whole chapter, it's chapter 10, in Hilchos Lashon Hara, in Sefer Chofetz Chaim, but there are many, many conditions that you have to fulfill before you're able to do it, even if it's for a positive purpose. For example, if this positive piece of information you want to impart to somebody else is about somebody who used to bully you in elementary school, and you've always resented this, then because you've got your own personal agenda and personal grudge against the guy, then you cannot be the person to inform him. It gets very, very complicated. So complicated that it really becomes a bit depressing. Because you've not going to never be able to speak Lashon Hara. But not be able to speak Lashon Hara for a positive purpose. What happened about protecting other people? So, the Chofetz Chaim says, Ve'esher dehu hadin, im kavonasa besipur lahofeg es dagosa miliboy. And yeah, there's certainly a green light given if it is, in speaking Lashon Hara, you're trying to create a positive outcome for somebody else. But what if, in speaking Lashon Hara, you're doing it as a therapy? See, there's two types of Lashon Hara. There is the person that speaks Lashon Hara because basically they are a bit unkind, and they like, for reasons of revenge or whatever, they like going around and saying nasty stuff about people, or a person. But there's another type of Lashon Hara, and that is when you're hurt so profoundly and so badly by somebody else that you need to tell somebody, you need to speak to somebody about that. Is that permissible? So the reason you're doing it is because you'll burst. You'll go mad if I don't tell you what this person did to me. A trouble, and of course Shlomo HaMelech famously says, in Mishli Yud Beis Kaf Hey, then the Yisachen al Acherim, if you speak to other people, then Daiga believe Ish. Say it to other people, then it's a good thing. So is that permissible? And the Chofetz Chaim is worried about that one too. However, in this wonderful edition of the Chofetz Chaim, which is called the Dirshu edition, we've got all sorts of contemporary commentators here as well, or poskim here as well, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Reb Eliashiv, etc., etc. And here he says the following thing. They're all concerned with getting this right, but one thing I liked here very much. Suppose a wife is very upset by something that happened, and she wants to share this with her husband. And it's clearly Lashon Hara, i.e., the guy did something wrong, and it's true. That's Lashon Hara, you're not allowed to do it. But the poor woman is really distressed. So if she goes to her husband and says, you know what happens, I went to Rabbi Reuben Sushir, and, excuse me, we live in Yerushalayim. Maybe when we were in New York, you could tell me this. But not now. No. So here, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach writes, "Mehashibudim umatolim al habal." It's part of the responsibility of being a husband who l'hargia es ishtoi, to calm his wife, to show concern for his wife, midaigas v'hadvorim hamatzigim lo, and for things that have upset her. V'lo yitochen im kein shehi oser lo lahatzin betfona. And therefore it's not forbidden under any circumstances for a wife or a husband to go and speak to their spouse and saying, I'm really upset. Who else could you speak to? If your motivation is because you're looking at it as a therapy, if I can share it with you. Now, if you go to share it with other people, rabbis get this problem all the time. So when somebody comes to tell me something that's happened, can I listen to them? Of course I can listen to them. I'm obliged not to believe it. In other words, it's a maybe. And only an idiot hears one side of any story and comes to a conclusion. I mean, you have to be a complete twit to do that. However, you are allowed to listen to them, and you can't turn around and say, oh no, I'm not here to help you because this is going to disturb my soul. They are a part of your soul. Remember I told you that before in Tomer Devora, ki hu mamish, ki he mamish. Each of us is part of each other. So you are a part of me and you're upset, of course, I can tell you. Anyway, there's a whole big halacha here, and what happens if the shidduch's gone off? Can you turn and say, well, don't worry, the guy was hopeless anyway. No, you can't say that. Just say he wasn't for you. But there's a chidush that I came up with here. But it only really works if you've got emunah. But it's very, very therapeutic. You see, when I say this story about something's happened to you and it's bursting to come out, and it's not because you're nasty, it's just that you need the therapy of sharing this. I think in America they say a trouble shared is a trouble halved, something like that. Then if you want for therapeutic reasons, even though there's questions how to do it, I have discovered a way to do this which there's no shilas whatsoever. Take it and tell it to God. Say to God, she did this to me. And that's okay, because where else would you take your troubles to but your dad? Wouldn't it be nice for those a little bit older and don't have dads or mums anymore? But wouldn't it just be nice when you're really upset and something's really gone wrong in your life to be able to go to your mom or go to your dad and say, Dad, I got to tell you this. And boom, you let it all out. Wouldn't that be good? Well, you can do that to HaShem. Now, here's the funny thing. And you can try this. This shiur comes with, a guarantee. You can road test what I'm about to tell you. When the Yetzer Hara comes to you and tells you to speak Lashon Hara, and you do, see, the Yetzer Hara is basically, it helps to understand the Yetzer Hara is basically an algorithm. Right? It's a spiritual algorithm. It has a job to do. He has a job to do. As soon as he's got you to do it, he's happy. So, the Chazal say about this, that the Yetzer Hara is a wise old king who's also a fool. So that sounds a bit contradictory. He knows every tactic to get you in the world, but he'll fall for his own nonsense. So, for example, you're sitting in yeshiva and you're learning. I know this from many years of experience. And it's going really, really well, and then suddenly you see in front of your eyes a nice cup of coffee made in a nice, what was it called? No, not Keurig. We don't do Keurig machines here. What's the one we have? An espresso machine. You can smell it. Now this is Yetzer Hara. He wants you to stop learning. So what are you supposed to say? Don't say, "Ha ha! You think you're going to trip me up? I'm not. I'm just going to sit learning." You're toast. He's much stronger than you. But you can use his tactics against him. You can turn around and say, "You know what? You're right. I'm going to have that coffee, but just give me half an hour." And the funny thing is, the strange thing is, he'll leave you alone for half an hour. More accurate than the most expensive Swiss watch. He will leave you for half an hour. And it's an amazing thing. Half an hour later, without looking at your watch, coffee, the coffee. And you might be able to push him away for another 10 minutes. And then you have to go and have the coffee. But the thing is, why does he leave you alone? It's because he's an algorithm. His job is to get you to drink the coffee. The fact that you managed to learn for 40 minutes, he doesn't get that bit. He's just been able to go and check, the program checks the box. Done it. Got them to... Right. If you speak Lashon Hara, then guess what? He'll leave you alone. He won't try and get you to go around and do it again and again and again, because you spoke Lashon... You spoke to God? Doesn't matter. As far as he's concerned, he spoke Lashon Hara. So he's a fool. He falls for his own tricks. You can actually tell God. Now, if you've got emunah, and you're not a phony, if you work in emunah, then you feel satisfied. You feel good about this. Because God, I spoke to my dad. I said this shiur in Gateshead Yeshiva. I also wrote this in Hamodia, because I write for Hamodia, and I did not get crucified. Because you get anything even slightly wrong in Hamodia, there's about 5,000 letters calling for your execution the next week. Right? And so this has been road tested. This is authentic Yiddishkeit. I think it's my own Chiddush. I think about my entire life I've come up with one or two. So this is my second Chiddush in the world. And the other one is what's the word in the vocabulary? Not in the vocabulary of Hashem. Oops, I'm trying to claim as a Chiddush. Anyway, so this is it. Guess what? If you say to Hashem Yisborach, fine. Somebody said to me, but remember, you'll be very careful when you're speaking Lashon Hara about somebody else to Hashem Yisborach, because you're speaking about another one of his children, which is clever. And maybe you'll say to him, am I sure before I go and do this? Maybe I should have gone and asked him, just in case it's a different story. But if you have a munah, if you work on a munah, then guess what? It's extremely therapeutic. It's extremely therapeutic. You can start to say, okay, I don't get it, I don't see it, but ultimately maybe one day I will. Certainly when I get upstairs I will. But even in our own lifetimes, how many times has everybody sitting around this table said, at the time I thought it was the worst possible thing that could have happened to me. And now you see it totally different. Now with different perspective, you see how it was the best thing. Lose that job was the best thing. That rabbi I told you about, or the non-rabbi, became ill. I knew he'd become ill, but I didn't know really ill. And so some of his Kaira phoned me up. It was the day before he died. I didn't know he was that ill. I said, Rabbi Plony wants to speak to you, said somebody, a lady. And I didn't want to speak to him. But suddenly there he was, and it was this tiny little voice. I want to apologize. I want to apologize. I want you to know I didn't treat you well. And I know that I owe you $60,000. And anything I do to put it right. And it's funny, I said to him, I don't care. I don't care about the $60,000. I'd just rather you go better. And I meant it. It's funny, when you get to the serious bits of life, then the really important things become very, very obvious to you. And I meant that. Okay. And he said, don't worry, man. There's somebody in his family who's going to look after this $60,000 that they owed me in wages. He wasn't dying, saying they never gave the money. But the fellow himself, all I wanted to do was forgive him. Because if you forgive them, then Hashem forgives you. Because if you forgive them, you're forgiving Hashem. He allowed it to happen. He allowed that to happen to you, didn't he? So if the guy's a nasty piece of work, right, Hashem chooses not such nice people to do not nice things to you, and good people to do good things to you. But if this person wants to be forgiven, and you have a munah, and you know that Hashem wanted it to happen to you in the first place, then you're ultimately forgiving Hashem. Are you not? And when you forgive him, then he forgives you. That's Mida Keneg and Mida. And that's a good way to go to Rosh Hashanah. But we'll expand on this when I see you again next time.
That was a nice way to end.
Was it? Thank you.